The humid air hung thick and heavy. A suffocating blanket woven with the scent of brine and decayed it clung to Shaw like a second skin as he hauled the fishing net. Its mesh heavy with the day's meager catch, the sun, a malevolent eye in the sky, beat down on his weathered face, etching deeper lines into the map of a life he desperately tried to bury. He was a ghost here, a shadow haunting the fringes of this forgotten coastal town, and no one knew him. No one cared about the man he used to be. That was the point. Hefting the net onto the rickety pier, Shaw felt the familiar ache in his shoulders, a constant reminder of the years spent honing his body into a weapon. Those days were supposed to be over. He traded bullets for bait, bloodshed for barnacles, hoping to find solace in the monotonous rhythm of the sea. He should have known peace was a luxury he couldn't afford. The rhythmic creak of the pier was shattered by the roar of an engine, a sound that didn't belong in this tranquil backwater. Black SUV, gleaming and menacing, screeched to a halt, kicking up dust that momentarily obscured the oppressive sun. Two figures emerged, their tailored suits and sunglasses screaming authority and indifference. They moved with a practiced efficiency, their eyes scanning the surroundings with cold calculation. Shaw straightened, his senses sharpening. He recognized the look, the predatory gaze that dissected and assessed. He hadn't seen it in years, not directed at him, but the memory was etched into his bones. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that his past had finally caught up. Mr. Shaw, the taller of the two men, spoke, his voice devoid of warmth. We need you to come with us. Shaw didn't bother with denials or questions. He knew resistance was futile, at least for now. He'd learned long ago that sometimes the only way out was through. He glanced at the fishing net, the symbol of his failed attempt at redemption, and a bitter smile touched his lips. It seemed the sea wasn't ready to let him go. Not yet. The drive was silent, the landscape blurring into an indistinguishable green and brown. Shaw used the time to gather his thoughts, to prepare for whatever awaited him. He knew it wouldn't be pleasant. These men weren't here for a friendly chat. They arrived at a secluded airfield, a relic of a bygone era. A private jet, sleek and black, sat waiting on the tarmac. As they approached, Shaw noticed the subtle details, the reinforced landing gear, the tinted windows, the heavily armed guards stationed nearby. This wasn't just transportation. It was a mobile fortress. Inside the jet, the atmosphere was sterile and impersonal. The seats were plush, the amenities luxurious, but the air crackled with unspoken tension. The taller man, who introduced himself as Agent Davies, handed Shaw a file. Everything you need to know, Davies said, his voice clipped and professional. Read it. You don't have a choice in the matter. Shaw opened the file, his eyes scanning the contents. The information was fragmented, incomplete, but the picture that emerged was disturbing. Underground fighting rings, genetically modified combatants, government complicity. It was a world of shadows and brutality, a world he thought he'd left behind. One name stood out. Titan, a chemically enhanced super soldier, the champion of the underground arena. And apparently, Shaw was being recruited to take him down. He closed the file, a grim understanding settling over him. They weren't just asking for his help. They were forcing him back into the game, and this time, the stakes were higher than ever. Shaw stared out the jet's window, the clouds a swirling canvas of gray and white mirroring the turmoil in his mind. Titan. The name echoed the chilling efficiency he'd read about in the file. Genetically enhanced, chemically augmented, a weapon forged in a lab, honed in the arena. He was being asked, no, ordered, to face something that wasn't entirely human. Why me? Shaw finally asked, breaking the silence. Agent Davies, who hadn't moved a muscle since handing him the file, turned his gaze. You have a unique skill set, Mr. Shaw, Davies replied, his voice flat. You're resourceful. And you have experience with this kind of operation. Experience I'd rather forget, Shaw muttered, his gaze hardening. The mention of his past was a deliberate jab, a reminder of the life he tried so hard to leave behind. Davies ignored the comment. We believe you're the best chance we have of stopping this program. Titan is unstable. He's becoming increasingly difficult to control. If he gets out, the consequences would be catastrophic. Shaw leaned back in his seat, his mind racing. He knew there was more to this than Davies was letting on. They weren't just worried about Titan. They were afraid of something else, something buried deep within this twisted program. What's the real reason? Shaw pressed, his voice low and dangerous. What are you hiding? Davies hesitated, his composure momentarily cracking. This program, it's gone rogue. It was supposed to be a controlled environment, a way to develop enhanced soldiers for national security. But it's become something else. The Overseer, he's taken it in a direction we never intended. The Overseer. Another name in the file, but this one carried a different weight. He was the architect of this nightmare. The puppet master pulling the strings. He was the one Shaw needed to reach if he wanted to expose the truth. And you want me to clean up your mess? Shaw said, a hint of cynicism in his voice. We want you to stop him. Davies corrected, before he does irreparable damage. Before this whole thing blows up in our faces. Shaw considered the offer, weighing his options. He could refuse, walk away, and return to his quiet life by the sea. But he knew he couldn't. The images in the file, the faces of the fighters, the blatant disregard for human life. They wouldn't let him. He was a soldier, even if he didn't want to be, and soldiers didn't turn their backs on injustice. What about my incentive? Shaw asked, his eyes narrowing. I'm not doing this for free. Davies smiled, a cold, predatory expression that sent a shiver down Shaw's spine. We can offer you certain assurances. Your past can be erased. A clean slate. A new identity. Anything you want. Shaw scoffed. I don't want a clean slate. I want the truth to come out. I want the Overseer to pay for what he's done. That can be arranged, Davies said smoothly. But first, you have to survive. You have to beat Titan. The jet began its descent, the ground rushing up to meet them. Shaw braced himself, preparing for the fight ahead. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He was walking into a viper's nest, surrounded by enemies on all sides. But he was ready. He was done running from his past. It was time to face it head on as the wheels touched down. Shaw knew one thing for sure. This was going to be a bloodbath, and he was going to make sure the right people paid the price. The jet taxied to a stop inside a cavernous hangar, its walls lined with armed guards. The air thrummed with a barely contained energy, a sense of anticipation that made Shaw's skin crawl. This wasn't just an arena. It was a cage. As he stepped off the plane, he was immediately surrounded, his movements restricted. Davies, his expression unreadable, led him through a maze of corridors, each one more sterile and impersonal than the last. The sounds of the outside world faded, replaced by the muffled roar of a crowd, the clang of metal, the guttural cries of men in pain. They arrived at a large steel door, emblazoned with a single word. Arena. Davies punched in a code, the door hissed open, and Shaw was thrust into a sensory overload. The arena was a massive amphitheater, carved into the earth. Tiered seating surrounded a central fighting pit, bathed in the harsh glare of spotlights. The crowd was a seething mass of faces, their eyes hungry for violence. The air was thick with the smells of sweat, blood, and cheap liquor. It was a gladiatorial spectacle for the modern age, a depraved circus of human suffering. Shaw was led to a small holding cell beneath the arena. The cell was bare, save for a cot and a toilet. As the door clanged shut behind him, he felt a wave of claustrophobia wash over him. He was trapped, a pawn in a game he didn't understand. A voice crackled over the loudspeaker. Welcome, Mr. Shaw, to the Crucible. Here you will prove your worth. Here you will fight for your survival. And here you will entertain us. Suddenly, the wall opposite him flickered to life, revealing a large screen. On the screen appeared a figure shrouded in shadow, his face obscured by darkness. This was the Overseer. Mr. Shaw, the Overseer said, his voice distorted and amplified. I've been expecting you. Agent Davies assures me that you are uniquely qualified for this undertaking, that your particular set of skills will be invaluable to my enterprise. Enterprise? Shaw scoffed. You mean your little sideshow of death? The Overseer chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that sent a chill down Shaw's spine. Death is merely a tool. Mr. Shaw, a means to an end. I offer my patrons entertainment, excitement, a glimpse into the darker aspects of human nature, and in return, I receive power. Power built on the suffering of others, Shaw countered. Suffering is a choice, Mr. Shaw. These men choose to fight. They choose to risk their lives. They choose to be exceptional. As the overseer spoke, images flashed across the screen, glimpses of Shaw's past. A Black Ops mission gone wrong. A betrayal by a trusted colleague. The faces of the men he'd left behind. The memories flooded back, raw and painful. "You know nothing about choice," Shaw growled, his fists clenching. "On the contrary, Mr. Shaw," the overseer said, his voice laced with amusement. "I know everything about choice. And I have chosen you. You have a purpose here, Mr. Shaw. You have a destiny to fulfill. Embrace it." The screen went blank, leaving Shaw alone in the darkness. The overseer's words echoed in his mind, a sinister promise of things to come. That he knew he was being manipulated, used as a weapon in a game he didn't fully grasp. But he also knew he had a chance to turn the tables, to expose the overseer's operation and bring it crashing down. He closed his eyes. Taking a deep breath, he had a fight to win, not just in the arena, but against the corruption that permeated this entire place. He had a debt to pay to the men he'd lost, to himself, and he was going to make sure the overseer paid it in full. The roar of the crowd grew louder, a deafening wave of anticipation that it was time. The heavy steel door of his cell swung open, revealing two hulking guards. "Showtime, Shaw." One of them grunted, his eyes cold and devoid of emotion. They didn't need to say anything else. The message was clear: he was being thrown into the arena. Whether he liked it or not, Shaw walked between the guards, his senses on high alert. The corridor led directly into the arena, the roar of the crowd intensifying with each step. He could feel their eyes on him, their bloodlust palpable. He was a gladiator entering the Colosseum, a lamb being led to the slaughter. But he was far from helpless as he stepped into the arena. The spotlights blazed, momentarily blinding him. He used the brief moment of disorientation to assess his surroundings. The arena floor was a circle of packed earth, stained with blood and scarred with the marks of countless battles. Cameras were mounted on every wall, capturing every angle of the fight for the viewing pleasure of the overseer's patrons. Betting booths lined the upper tiers, their occupants shouting odds and placing wagers. Security guards were stationed around the perimeter, their weapons trained on the fighters. This was a meticulously controlled environment, designed to maximize profit and minimize risk for those in charge. His opponent was already in the arena, a towering brute with a shaved head and a network of scars crisscrossing his body. He was clearly a veteran of the crucible, his eyes radiating a cold, predatory confidence. He cracked his knuckles, a menacing grin spreading across his face. The announcer's voice boomed over the loudspeakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the main event. Tonight we have a newcomer, a man with a reputation, a man known as Shaw. And he will be facing off against the reigning champion of the lower bracket, the brutal, the unstoppable, Kratos." The crowd roared its approval, chanting Kratos' name. Shaw remained calm, his eyes fixed on his opponent. He knew he was at a disadvantage. Kratos was bigger, stronger, and more experienced in this arena. But Shaw had something Kratos didn't: intelligence. The bell rang, signaling the start of the fight. Kratos charged forward, a whirlwind of fists and fury. Shaw dodged and weaved, using his agility to avoid the brunt of the attack. That he knew he couldn't go toe-to-toe with Kratos. He had to use his brains to outsmart him. He noticed Kratos' movements were predictable, his attacks telegraphed. He was a brute, relying on brute force rather than strategy. Shaw used this to his advantage, anticipating Kratos' attacks and countering with swift, precise strikes. He targeted pressure points, exploiting weaknesses in Kratos' defenses. The fight was brutal, a dance of violence and desperation. Shaw took several hits, feeling the pain searing through his body. But he refused to give in. He knew he had to win, not just for himself, but for everyone trapped in this hellhole. Finally, after several minutes of intense fighting, Shaw saw his opportunity. Kratos lunged forward, leaving himself open. Shaw sidestepped the attack and delivered a swift kick to Kratos' knee, sending him crashing to the ground. Kratos lay groaning, unable to get up. Shaw stood over him, his breathing ragged. He could end it now, finish him off with a single blow. The crowd was screaming for blood, their eyes fixed on him, waiting for the kill. But Shaw hesitated. He looked into Kratos' eyes, seeing not just a brutal fighter, but a broken man. A victim of the crucible, he couldn't bring himself to kill him. Instead, he stepped back, signaling to the referee that he was done. The crowd erupted in boos and jeers, but Shaw ignored them. He had won the fight, but he had refused to become a monster. The announcer's voice, laced with confusion, announced Shaw as the victor. As he was led out of the arena, he noticed the overseer watching him from his private box, his expression unreadable. He had sent a message not just to the overseer, but to everyone in the crucible. He wasn't just a fighter, he was a threat. And he was just getting started. Back in his cell, the adrenaline slowly began to subside, replaced by a dull ache in his muscles and a burning resentment towards the overseer. Shaw knew he couldn't just keep fighting in the arena. He needed information, allies, a plan. He had to understand the inner workings of the crucible if he wanted to bring it down. The first step was to make contact, to find someone he could trust. He started by observing his fellow fighters, watching their interactions, listening to their conversations. Most were hardened criminals, driven by desperation or a thirst for violence. But some, he sensed, were victims, trapped in the crucible against their will. He approached a hulking figure named Ragnar, a former cage fighter with a reputation for brutality. Shaw had seen him fight earlier that day, his movements sluggish, his eyes glazed over. He suspected Ragnar was being drugged, his skills diminished to make him more manageable. "Ragnar," Shaw said, his voice low. "Can I talk to you?" Ragnar grunted, his eyes barely focusing. "What do you want, pretty boy?" "Come to admire the beast." "I want to know what's going on here," Shaw replied. "I want to know who's running this place, and why." Ragnar laughed, a hollow, rasping sound. "You're new here, aren't you? This is the crucible. The overseer runs it. He owns us all. There's got to be a way out," Shaw persisted. Ragnar shook his head. "No way out. You fight, you win, you die. That's all there is." Shaw realized he wasn't going to get anything useful from Ragnar. He was too far gone, too broken. He needed to find someone with more knowledge, someone with more fight left in them. Later that day, as he was being escorted to the training area, Shaw noticed a woman in a white coat, tending to a wounded fighter. She moved with a quiet efficiency, her eyes filled with compassion. She was Dr. Eris Thorne, the Crucible's medical officer. Shaw knew this was his chance. He feigned an injury, grabbing his arm and groaning in pain. The guards stopped, their eyes wary. Dr. Thorne approached, her expression concerned. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice soft. "I think I dislocated my shoulder," Shaw said. Wincing, Dr. Thorne examined his arm, her fingers probing gently. "It's just a strain. But you should get it checked out." She gestured to the guards. "Take him to the infirmary." In the infirmary, Dr. Thorne treated Shaw's arm with a practiced hand as she worked. She spoke in hushed tones. "You're new here," she said. "I saw your fight. You have potential." "Potential for what?" Shaw asked. "To become another one of the overseer's puppets." Dr. Thorne's expression darkened. "This place. It's not what it seems. The overseer is conducting experiments, using drugs and genetic manipulation to enhance the fighters. It's barbaric." "I suspected as much," Shaw said. "That fighter, Ragnar, he's being drugged, isn't he?" Dr. Thorne nodded. "They all are, to some extent. But some are more enhanced than others." She leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper. "The overseer is obsessed with creating the perfect warrior. He's pushing the boundaries of science, with no regard for human life. And his prized creation is Titan." Shaw felt a chill run down his spine. Titan. The chemically enhanced supersoldier. He was the overseer's ultimate weapon, the one Shaw had been brought here to defeat. "I want to stop him," Shaw said. "I want to expose what's going on here." Dr. Thorne looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "It's dangerous. The overseer has eyes everywhere." "I know," Shaw replied, "but I can't stand by and watch this happen. Will you help me?" Dr. Thorne hesitated for a moment, then nodded resolutely. "Yes," she said. "I will. I've been waiting for someone to fight back. I have information. Evidence that can expose the overseer's operation. But we need to be careful that he's always watching. Shaw knew he had found an ally, a partner in his fight against the Overseer. But he also knew that he was walking a dangerous path, one that could lead to his death. But he was willing to take the risk. He had a purpose now, a reason to fight, and he wasn't going to let the Overseer stand in his way. The next day, Dr. Thorne arranged for Shaw to observe Titan's training session. She warned him that the sight would be disturbing, but Shaw insisted on seeing it for himself. He needed to understand the threat he was facing. They watched from a hidden observation deck overlooking a private training arena. Titan was a mountain of muscle. His body sculpted and augmented to near-inhuman proportions. Veins bulged beneath his skin, pulsing with a strange, unnatural energy. His eyes were cold and empty, devoid of any trace of humanity. He was facing off against two other fighters, both experienced veterans of the Crucible. They were skilled and formidable, but they were no match for Titan. He moved with a speed and power that defied logic. His attacks precise and devastating. He tossed one fighter across the arena like a rag doll, sending him crashing into the wall. The other fighter tried to evade, but Titan was too fast. He grabbed him by the throat, lifting him off the ground. The fighter struggled, his face turning purple. But Titan showed no mercy as he squeezed, his grip tightening until the fighter's neck snapped with a sickening crack. Titan dropped the body to the ground. His breathing barely elevated. He stood motionless for a moment, then let out a primal roar that echoed through the arena. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated power, a sound that sent a shiver down Shaw's spine. "He's terrifying," Shaw said, his voice barely a whisper. "He's more than terrifying," Dr. Thorne replied. "He's a monster. The Overseer has pumped him full of experimental chemicals, pushing his body beyond its limits. He's stronger, faster, more resilient than any human being. But the chemicals are also affecting his mind. He's becoming increasingly unstable, unpredictable." "What kind of chemicals?" Shaw asked. Dr. Thorne shook her head. "I don't know the exact composition. The Overseer keeps that information closely guarded. But I've seen the effects. They enhance muscle growth, increase aggression, and suppress pain. But they also cause hallucinations, paranoia, and violent outbursts." Shaw watched as Titan continued his training, his movements relentless, his power seemingly limitless. He knew he was facing an uphill battle. Titan was a force of nature, a walking weapon of mass destruction. But Shaw couldn't back down. He had a responsibility to stop him, to prevent him from unleashing his chaos on the world. "He's going to be a problem," Shaw said, his eyes narrowing. "But he's not invincible. Every weapon has a weakness." "What do you mean?" Dr. Thorne asked. "The chemicals," Shaw replied. "They're making him stronger, but they're also making him vulnerable. They're affecting his mind, his senses. He's losing control." "But how can we exploit that?" Dr. Thorne asked. "We need to find out more about the chemicals," Shaw said. "We need to understand how they work, what their side effects are. And then we can find a way to use them against him." He turned to Dr. Thorne, his expression determined. "I'm going to fight Titan. But I'm not going to fight him head-on. That I'm going to use his own strength against him. That I'm going to turn him into his own worst enemy." Dr. Thorne looked at him, her eyes filled with concern. "It's a suicide mission, Shaw. He'll kill you." "Maybe," Shaw replied. "But I'm not afraid to die. I'm more afraid of what will happen if I don't try." He turned and walked away, leaving Dr. Thorne standing alone in the observation deck. He knew he was walking a dangerous path, one that could lead to his death. But he was determined to stop Titan, to expose the Overseer's operation, and to bring justice to the Crucible. He was ready to fight, even if it meant sacrificing everything. Shaw and Dr. Thorne began to work together in secret, their alliance forged in the shared desire to expose the Overseer's atrocities. Dr. Thorne used her access to the infirmary to gather information about the chemicals being used on Titan, meticulously documenting their effects and searching for any potential vulnerabilities. Shaw, meanwhile, continued to fight in the arena, using his victories to gain favor and access to different parts of the Crucible. Their clandestine meetings were risky, conducted in the shadows, always aware of the Overseer's omnipresent surveillance. They communicated in code, sharing information in small, encrypted messages passed through trusted intermediaries. The danger was constant, but the stakes were too high to back down. One evening, After a particularly brutal fight, Shaw was approached by a woman he had noticed in the training area. She was lean and athletic, her movements fluid and graceful. Her name was Anya, and she was known as the Serpent for her speed and agility. She was a master of stealth and deception, a lethal assassin with a mysterious past. "Shaw," she said, her voice low and husky. "I've been watching you. You're different from the others." "Different how?" Shaw asked, his eyes wary. "You fight with purpose," Anya replied. "You're not just fighting to survive. You're fighting for something more." Shaw hesitated, unsure whether to trust her. He knew Anya was dangerous, a wild card in this deadly game. But he also sensed a shared understanding, a mutual desire to escape the crucible. "What do you want, Anya?" Shaw asked. "I want out," she replied. "I want to escape this hellhole and disappear. And I think you can help me." "Why me?" Shaw asked. "Because you're making waves," Anya said. "You're challenging the overseer, and that makes you a threat. And threats have a way of attracting attention. And you want to be on the winning side," Shaw said, his voice laced with cynicism. Anya shrugged. "Survival is a game, Shaw. And I intend to win. I have skills that can be useful to you. I can get you information. Access to places you can't reach on your own. I can be your eyes and ears in the shadows." Shaw considered her offer. He knew partnering with Anya was a risk, but he also knew he needed allies. He couldn't fight the overseer alone. "What's your price?" Shaw asked. "My freedom," Anya replied. "Help me escape, and I'll help you bring down the overseer." Shaw looked into Anya's eyes, searching for any sign of deception. He saw only a cold determination, a burning desire to escape. He knew she was telling the truth. "All right, Anya," Shaw said. "We have a deal." And so, an uneasy alliance was formed. Shaw, Dr. Thorne, and Anya, three individuals from different backgrounds, united by a common goal: to expose the overseer's operation and escape the crucible. They knew the risks were immense, the odds stacked against them. But they were willing to fight, to sacrifice everything for the chance to break free from the overseer's control. Their first task was to gather more information about the chemicals being used on Titan. Dr. Thorne had managed to obtain a small sample, but she needed access to the overseer's private laboratory to analyze it properly. Anya volunteered to infiltrate the lab, using her stealth and agility to bypass the security systems. The plan was dangerous, fraught with peril, but they had no other choice. They needed to understand Titan's weaknesses if they were going to have any chance of defeating him, and they were willing to risk everything to get that information. The plan was set. Anya would infiltrate the overseer's lab under the cover of darkness, while Shaw and Dr. Thorne provided a distraction. They chose a night when a high-stakes match was scheduled, drawing the attention of the guards and the overseer himself. Anya slipped through the shadows, her movements silent and precise. She bypassed the security cameras, disabled the alarms, and navigated the labyrinthine corridors with ease. She was a ghost, unseen and unheard. Meanwhile, Shaw deliberately provoked a fight in the training area, drawing the attention of the guards. He fought with a controlled fury, disabling his opponents without killing them, creating chaos and confusion. Dr. Thorne used the distraction to access the security control room, disabling the cameras in the lab area, creating a blind spot for Anya. Anya reached the lab, her heart pounding in her chest. The door was heavily fortified, but she had anticipated this. She pulled out a set of specialized tools, her fingers working quickly and efficiently. Within minutes, the door hissed open, revealing the overseer's inner sanctum. Inside, the lab was a sterile and unsettling environment, filled with strange machines and bubbling chemicals. Anya located the samples of Titan's serum, carefully collecting them and preparing to escape. But as she turned to leave, she heard a voice behind her. "Impressive, Anya. I knew you were skilled, but I didn't realize you were this resourceful." Anya whirled around, her hand reaching for her weapon. Standing in the doorway was Ragnar, the hulking fighter Shaw had approached earlier. But his eyes were clear now, his movements sharp and purposeful. He was no longer the drugged-out brute Shaw had encountered. "Ragnar," Anya said, her voice filled with disbelief. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here to stop you," Ragnar replied, a cold smile spreading across his face. The overseer knew you were planning something. He suspected you were working with Shaw. He asked me to keep an eye on you. Anya realized she had been betrayed. Ragnar was a mole, a double agent working for the overseer. He had been playing them all along. I trusted you, Anya said, her voice filled with anger. Trust is a weakness, Anya. Ragnar replied, and weakness has no place in the crucible. He lunged at Anya, his movements surprisingly fast. Anya dodged the attack, drawing her weapon. A brutal fight ensued, a clash of skill and strength. Anya was agile and deadly, but Ragnar was bigger and stronger. He absorbed her attacks, his body seemingly impervious to pain. Meanwhile, in the training area, the overseer had arrived, his face contorted with rage. He realized he had been played. Shaw and Dr. Thorne had used the distraction to allow Anya to infiltrate the lab. Seize them! The overseer roared, his voice echoing through the arena. Kill them all! The guards swarmed Shaw and Dr. Thorne. Surrounding them, a fierce battle erupted, a desperate fight for survival. Shaw fought with a ferocity born of desperation, taking down guard after guard. But they were outnumbered, outgunned. Dr. Thorne, caught in the crossfire, was struck by a stray bullet. She collapsed to the ground. Her eyes filled with pain. Shaw fought his way to her side, shielding her from the onslaught. Get out of here, Shaw! Dr. Thorne gasped, her voice weak. Save yourself. And expose him. Expose the overseer. Shaw knew he couldn't save her. He had to escape. To carry out her dying wish, he grabbed Anya's signal device from his pocket and activated it. Hoping she had managed to escape the lab with a heavy heart, Shaw fought his way through the guards, creating an opening for himself. He escaped into the labyrinthine corridors, pursued by the overseer's forces and the lab. Anya managed to defeat Ragnar, but not without sustaining serious injuries. She grabbed the samples and fled, just as the alarms blared. She knew the crucible was now on high alert, her escape route compromised. She reached the rendezvous point, but Shaw was nowhere to be seen. She received his signal, a desperate plea for help, but she knew she couldn't stay. She had to escape, to deliver the samples to someone who could expose the overseer's operation. With a final glance back at the crucible, Anya disappeared into the shadows, leaving Shaw and Dr. Thorne to face the overseer's wrath. Dr. Thorne was captured, and Shaw was now a hunted man, his plans in ruins, his allies scattered. The stakes had never been higher. Shaw was alone, hunted, and fueled by a burning rage. He had failed to protect Dr. Thorne, and his plans had been exposed. But he refused to be defeated. He would not allow the overseer to win. It was time to abandon stealth and embrace open rebellion. He knew the crucible inside and out. He knew its weak points, its vulnerabilities. He knew how to exploit its systems and turn them against the overseer he would become. A one-man wrecking crew, tearing down the overseer's empire brick by brick. His first target was the security system. He used his knowledge of the corridors to navigate undetected, bypassing the guards and disabling the cameras one by one. He knew the overseer relied on surveillance to maintain control, and by eliminating the cameras, he would sow chaos and confusion. Next, he targeted the betting operations. He infiltrated the control room, disrupting the computer systems and manipulating the odds. He drained the overseer's accounts, transferring the funds to anonymous offshore accounts, crippling his financial resources. He then released a virus into the system, wiping out all records of the bets, throwing the gambling operation into complete disarray. But his most audacious move was to free the other fighters. He knew that many of them were victims, trapped in the crucible against their will. He used his influence to rally them, to convince them to join his cause. He spoke of freedom, of justice, of the chance to escape the overseer's tyranny. Some were hesitant, fearing the overseer's wrath. But others were eager to fight, to avenge their fallen comrades, to reclaim their lives. Shaw armed them with weapons he had scavenged from the guards, turning them into a fighting force. The crucible erupted in chaos. The fighters, emboldened by Shaw's leadership, rebelled against their captors. They stormed the training areas, disabled the security systems, and freed their fellow prisoners. The guards, caught off guard, were overwhelmed by the sheer number of fighters. The overseer watched in horror from his private box as his empire crumbled before his eyes. His security systems were down. His betting operations were in ruins, and his fighters were in open rebellion. He had lost control. He dispatched Titan to quell the uprising, ordering him to kill Shaw and restore order to the Crucible. Titan was a force of nature, an unstoppable killing machine, but Shaw was ready for him. He had anticipated this move, and he had a plan. He led the fighters to the arena, where he planned to make his final stand. He knew Titan would follow him there, eager to crush the rebellion. But the arena was no longer the Overseer's playground. It was now a battleground, a stage for the final showdown. Shaw addressed the fighters, his voice ringing with passion. "We are here tonight to fight for our freedom. We are here to avenge our fallen comrades. We are here to bring down the Overseer and his twisted empire. We are not gladiators. We are warriors, and we will not be denied." The fighters roared their approval, their eyes burning with determination. They were ready to fight, to die if necessary, for the chance to be free. Titan arrived, his massive frame filling the arena entrance. He surveyed the scene. His eyes cold and empty, he saw only enemies, obstacles to be crushed. The battle began, a chaotic and brutal melee. The fighters, armed with makeshift weapons, swarmed Titan, attacking him from all sides. But Titan was too strong, too fast. He swatted them away like flies, his attacks devastating. Shaw knew they couldn't defeat Titan through brute force. They had to use strategy, to exploit his weaknesses. He directed the fighters to target Titan's legs, to slow him down, to make him vulnerable. He used his knowledge of the arena to his advantage, luring Titan into traps, setting ambushes, using the environment. Against him, he was a master strategist, a cunning tactician. The fight raged on, the arena floor littered with bodies. The air was thick with the smells of blood and sweat. The fighters were exhausted, wounded, but they refused to give up. Shaw knew he had to face Titan himself. He had to draw his attention. To distract him from the other fighters, he stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Titan. "Titan!" Shaw shouted, his voice ringing through the arena. "It's time to end this." Titan turned his gaze towards Shaw, his eyes narrowing. He recognized him as the leader of the rebellion, the one who had disrupted his plans. He lunged at Shaw, his fist raised to strike. The final showdown was about to begin, while the remaining fighters battled Titan, buying him precious time. Shaw slipped away from the arena. He knew the real fight wasn't against Titan, but against the man who had created him. The Overseer. He had to reach the control room, to shut down the entire operation and expose the Overseer's crimes to the world. That he navigated the corridors with a grim determination, his body battered and bruised, his mind focused on his goal. He encountered pockets of resistance, guards loyal to the Overseer, but he dispatched them with ruthless efficiency. He was a man on a mission, and nothing would stand in his way. He reached the control room, a heavily fortified chamber overlooking the arena. The door was sealed, protected by a complex security system. But Shaw had anticipated this. He used his knowledge of the Crucible's infrastructure to bypass the security measures, disabling the alarms and opening the door. Inside, the Overseer stood alone, his face a mask of cold fury. He was surrounded by monitors, displaying images of the chaos and destruction raging throughout the Crucible. He had lost control, but he refused to surrender. "You can't stop me, Shaw," the Overseer said, his voice laced with contempt. "I am the future. I am the one who will unlock the true potential of humanity." "You're a monster," Shaw replied, his voice low and dangerous. "You're exploiting people, turning them into weapons for your own twisted amusement." "They are willing participants," the Overseer countered. "They crave power, control. I am simply giving them what they desire." "You're lying," Shaw said. "They're victims. You're drugging them, manipulating them, turning them into slaves." "I am providing them with purpose," the Overseer insisted. "I am giving them a reason to live." "Your purpose is profit," Shaw said. "Your reason is power. You're a parasite, feeding off the suffering of others." The Overseer's eyes narrowed. "You are a fool, Shaw. You cannot comprehend the true potential of this operation. I am on the verge of creating an army of super soldiers, an army that will dominate the world." "That's not going to happen," Shaw said. "I'm going to stop you." "You can try," the Overseer replied, a sinister smile spreading across his face. But you are just one man, and I have many more at my disposal. He pressed a button on his console, summoning his guards. The control room door burst open, and a squad of heavily armed soldiers stormed inside. They opened fire, unleashing a hail of bullets. Shaw dove for cover, dodging the bullets and returning fire with his own weapon. He was outnumbered, outgunned. But he was not outmatched. He was a master of combat, a skilled marksman. He moved with speed and precision, taking down the soldiers one by one. The control room became a war zone, a chaotic and deadly battleground. The air was thick with the smells of gunpowder and blood. The monitors flickered and died, displaying images of destruction and despair. Shaw fought with a ferocity born of desperation. His every move calculated and deadly. He used the environment to his advantage, taking cover behind consoles, using the shadows to his advantage. He was a force to be reckoned with, a one-man army. The overseer watched in disbelief as Shaw decimated his guards. His carefully constructed plans. Crumbling before his eyes, he realized he had underestimated his opponent. Shaw was more than just a fighter. He was a force of nature. Finally, after a prolonged and brutal battle, Shaw stood alone in the control room, surrounded by the bodies of the fallen soldiers. He was wounded, exhausted, but victorious. The overseer stood before him, his face a mask of defeat. He knew he had lost. His empire had crumbled, his plans had been thwarted, and his reign of terror was over. "It's over, overseer," Shaw said, his voice hoarse. "You're finished." "This is not the end, Shaw," the overseer replied, his eyes burning with hatred. "This is just the beginning. Someone will take my place. Someone will continue my work. The world will never be free of men like me." "Maybe," Shaw said, "but I'll be there to stop them. I'll be there to fight for those who can't fight for themselves." He raised his weapon, his finger on the trigger. It was time to end this, once and for all. But Shaw hesitated. He couldn't kill the overseer. Not yet. He needed him alive, to expose his crimes to the world. He lowered his weapon, his eyes fixed on the overseer. "It's not over," Shaw said. "I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you've done. I'm going to bring you to justice." Before the overseer could respond, a deafening roar shook the control room. The walls trembled, the lights flickered, and the air filled with a primal rage. Titan had broken through the barricades, his massive frame looming in the doorway. He had seen the chaos, the destruction, the death. He had sensed the overseer's distress, and he had come to protect his master, to crush anyone who dared to oppose him. "Titan," the overseer said, his voice filled with relief. "Kill him. Kill Shaw." Titan obeyed without hesitation. He lunged at Shaw, his fist a blur of motion. Shaw dodged the attack, narrowly avoiding a fatal blow. He knew he was facing an opponent unlike any he had ever encountered. Titan was stronger, faster, and more resilient than any human being. He was a force of nature, a walking weapon of mass destruction. But Shaw was not intimidated. He had studied Titan's weaknesses. He had analyzed his movements, and he had devised a plan. He knew he couldn't defeat Titan through brute force. He had to use his intelligence, his skill, and his cunning to exploit Titan's vulnerabilities. The battle began. A clash of titans in the heart of the crucible. Shaw moved with speed and precision, dodging Titan's attacks and countering with swift, precise strikes. He targeted pressure points, exploiting weaknesses in Titan's armor. Titan, fueled by rage and chemicals, attacked with relentless fury. He swung his fists, kicked with bone-crushing force, and roared with primal rage. He was a whirlwind of destruction, tearing through the control room, smashing consoles and shattering windows. Shaw knew he couldn't sustain the fight for long. Titan's superior strength and endurance would eventually overwhelm him. He had to find a way to end the fight quickly, to exploit Titan's weaknesses before it was too late. He remembered Dr. Thorne's research, her analysis of the chemicals that fueled Titan's power. She had discovered that the chemicals, while enhancing his strength and speed, also caused instability, paranoia, and violent outbursts. They were slowly destroying his mind, turning him into a monster. Shaw realized that he could use these side effects against Titan. He could exploit his instability to turn him against himself. He just needed to find a way to trigger the reaction. He led Titan through the control room, luring him towards the Overseer's console. He knew that the console contained the controls for the Crucible's audiovisual system. He had a plan to use the system to disorient Titan, to overload his senses and trigger a chemical reaction. He reached the console, dodging Titan's attacks and activating the audiovisual system. The control room filled with a cacophony of sound and light, a blinding and deafening assault on Titan's senses. The chemicals in Titan's brain reacted violently to the sensory overload. He began to convulse, his body shaking uncontrollably. He roared in pain, his eyes wide with terror. Shaw knew this was his chance. He lunged at Titan, delivering a series of swift, precise strikes to his pressure points. He targeted his joints, his nerves, his vital organs. He was a surgeon with a scalpel, dissecting Titan's body with ruthless efficiency. Titan staggered, his movements becoming sluggish and erratic. The chemicals were destroying him from the inside out, turning him into a broken shell of his former self. Shaw delivered a final blow, a powerful kick to Titan's chest, sending him crashing through the control room window. Titan plummeted to the arena floor below, landing with a sickening thud. The crowd roared in disbelief as Titan lay motionless on the ground, defeated. Shaw stood in the control room, his body battered and bruised, his breathing ragged. He had done it. He had defeated Titan. Not through brute force, but through intelligence, skill, and cunning. He turned his gaze towards the Overseer, who stood frozen in fear. The Overseer knew that his reign of terror was over, that he had lost everything. Shaw approached the Overseer, his eyes filled with a righteous fury. That it was time to bring him to justice. That it was time to expose his crimes to the world. With Titan defeated and the Overseer subdued, Shaw knew he had to act quickly. The authorities would be arriving soon, eager to clean up the mess and bury the truth. He had to expose the Overseer's crimes to the world, to ensure that the Crucible's horrors would never be forgotten. He accessed the Overseer's console, using his knowledge of the system to bypass the security protocols. He located the files containing the incriminating evidence. Records of the illegal experiments, the drugged fighters, the corrupt betting operations, and the government's complicity in the program. He uploaded the files to a secure server, sending them to news organizations and human rights groups around the world. He knew that once the information was released, there would be no turning back. The truth would be out, and the Overseer's empire would crumble. As he was uploading the files, he received a message from Anya. She had managed to escape the Crucible with the serum samples and was waiting for him at a rendezvous point outside the city. She had also managed to locate Dr. Thorne, who had been taken to a secret medical facility. Shaw knew he had to get to them. To ensure their safety, he couldn't leave them behind. Not after everything they had been through. He turned to the remaining fighters, those who had survived the rebellion. "It's time to go," Shaw said. "We're getting out of here." He led them through the corridors, evading the authorities and making their way to the exit. They encountered pockets of resistance, guards and security forces determined to stop them. But they fought their way through, their determination fueled by the promise of freedom. They reached the outside world, blinking in the sunlight, breathing in the fresh air. They had escaped the Crucible, but they knew they were still not safe. They were wanted men and women, hunted by the authorities. They made their way to the rendezvous point, where Anya and Dr. Thorne were waiting. Dr. Thorne was weak and injured, but she was alive. Shaw embraced her, relieved to see her safe. "Thank you, Shaw," Dr. Thorne said, her voice weak. "You did it. You exposed them." "We did it," Shaw replied. "We did it together." Anya handed Shaw a set of forged documents, providing them with new identities and a means of transportation. She had anticipated this, planning their escape with meticulous detail. "Where are we going?" Dr. Thorne asked. "Somewhere safe," Shaw replied. "Somewhere where we can start over." They piled into a waiting vehicle, leaving the Crucible behind. They knew the authorities would be arriving soon, eager to arrest them and bury the truth. But they were one step ahead as they drove away. They saw the news reports flashing across the screens of passing cars. The incriminating evidence had been released, and the world was learning about the horrors of the Crucible. The Overseer's empire was crumbling. His reign of terror was over. They had succeeded. They had exposed the truth. They had freed the fighters, and they had escaped with their lives. But they knew their journey was far from over. They were still hunted, still wanted. They would have to remain vigilant, to protect themselves from those who sought to silence them. But they were no longer alone. They had each other. They had formed a bond, a connection that could never be broken. They were survivors, warriors, fighters for justice, and they would continue to fight, to expose the truth, to protect the innocent. Their battle was far from over, but they were ready. They were ready to face whatever the future held. The news of the Crucible's exposure spread like wildfire, igniting a global scandal. Governments were toppled, corporations were investigated, and the world was forced to confront the dark underbelly of power and corruption. But for Shaw, Dr. Thorne, and Anya, there was no time for celebration. They were still fugitives, hunted by those who sought to silence them. They disappeared into the shadows, adopting new identities and moving from place to place, always one step ahead of their pursuers. They used their skills and knowledge to help others, to fight against injustice wherever they found it. Shaw became a protector of the innocent, a guardian angel for those who had nowhere else to turn. Dr. Thorne used her medical expertise to heal the sick and wounded, providing care to those who were forgotten by society. Anya continued to operate in the shadows, using her skills as an assassin to eliminate those who posed a threat to the vulnerable. They formed a network of allies, individuals who shared their values and their commitment to justice. They worked together in secret, exposing corruption, fighting against oppression, and protecting the innocent. They were a force for good in a world filled with darkness. One day, Shaw received a message from an anonymous source. The message contained a single word, Hydra. Shaw knew what it meant. Hydra was the name of a shadowy organization, a global conspiracy that had been pulling the strings behind the scenes for decades. They were the ones who had funded the Overseer's operation, who had provided the chemicals for Titan, and who had orchestrated the entire Crucible program. The Overseer was just a pawn in their game, a puppet controlled by forces far more powerful and sinister. Shaw realized that his fight was far from over. He had defeated the Overseer, but he had only scratched the surface of a much larger conspiracy. He shared the information with Dr. Thorne and Anya, and they agreed to continue the fight. They knew it would be dangerous, that they were facing an enemy with vast resources and influence, but they were not afraid. They had faced death before, and they were ready to face it again. They began to investigate Hydra, using their skills and connections to gather information. They discovered that Hydra was involved in a wide range of illegal activities, from drug trafficking and arms dealing to political assassinations and corporate espionage. They were a cancer on the world, spreading corruption and chaos wherever they went. Shaw, Dr. Thorne, and Anya vowed to stop them, to expose their crimes and bring them to justice. They knew it would be a long and difficult battle, but they were determined to fight to the end. The final scene shows Shaw, Dr. Thorne, and Anya standing on a rooftop overlooking a bustling city. They are silhouetted against the night sky, their faces grim and determined. It's just the beginning, Shaw says, his voice low and resolute. The fight is far from over. Dr. Thorne nods in agreement. We'll be ready, she says. We'll be there to stop them. Anya smiles, a hint of steel in her eyes. Let them come, she says. We'll be waiting. They turn and disappear into the shadows, leaving the audience to wonder what the future holds. The fight against Hydra has just begun, and Shaw, Dr. Thorne, and Anya are ready to face whatever challenges lie ahead. The world is in need of heroes, and they are ready to answer the call. The end, or just the beginning?